Admiral Danny Carter stood alone on the bridge of the starship Horizon's Edge. The main display showed Earth growing smaller with every passing second. Blue oceans and green lands became a marble, then a dot, then nothing at all. He did not cry. He had no tears left for a galaxy that had never wanted humanity in the first place. It was the year 2347. 200 years had passed since humanity first reached the stars and discovered they were not alone. 200 years of hoping things would get better. 200 years of disappointment. The Galactic Council ruled known space. 12 elder races sat in its chambers, making decisions for thousands of worlds. They had technology that seemed like magic. They had ships that could cross galaxies. They had lifespans measured in centuries. And they looked at humanity the way a person might look at an insect crawling across the floor. Danny remembered his grandfather's stories. The old man had been young when humanity first made contact with the Corvini trading vessel. Everyone thought it was the beginning of a golden age. Humanity would join the galactic community. They would learn and grow and become part of something bigger than themselves. Instead, they learned what it meant to be small. The Council allowed humanity to exist in a tiny corner of space. They could trade, but only through approved channels that took most of the profit. They could travel, but only on routes that kept them away from important systems. They could speak, but no one had to listen. Danny walked to the window and watched the stars. Behind the horizon's edge, 10,000 other ships followed in formation. Generation ships, cargo vessels, passenger cruisers, and military escorts. 8 billion human souls packed into metal shells, leaving behind the only home their species had ever known. On the deck below, Captain Kyle Bennett guided his civilian transport through the fleet. His ship carried 40,000 people, families mostly, with children who would never see Earth except in recordings. His navigator, a young woman named Megan Price, sat at her station with red eyes. She had been crying earlier, though she tried to hide it. "Sir," she said quietly, "are we doing the right thing?" Kyle thought about his answer for a long time. Through the viewport, he could see the other ships, their lights blinking in the darkness like a river of fireflies flowing away from everything they knew. "The Council ignored us for 200 years, he said. "When the Vraxian raiders attacked our colonies, we begged for help. They said it was not their concern. 12 million people died on New Melbourne. Children, Megan. Families just like the ones sleeping in our cargo holds. And the Council did nothing." He paused, remembering the images he had seen. Cities burning. People running. Ships descending from the sky with weapons that turned everything to ash. "Sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing," he finished. Megan nodded slowly. She did not seem comforted, but she seemed to understand. Far ahead of the fleet, Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood in a small recording room on the diplomatic vessel Swift Horizon. She wore her formal uniform for the last time. In a few hours, she would send a message to the Council chambers. It would be humanity's final words to the galaxy that had rejected them. She had spent weeks writing different versions. Angry versions that listed every crime the Council had committed against humanity. Bitter versions that predicted their eventual downfall. Desperate versions that begged for one more chance. In the end, she threw them all away. The message she recorded was simple. It lasted less than 2 minutes. "To the Galactic Council and the species it represents, humanity has decided to leave. We will not return. We wish you peace." That was all. No accusations, no threats, no tears, just goodbye. When the message arrived at the Council chambers, the elder races reacted exactly as humanity expected. They laughed. High Counselor Zethran of the Orinthians read the message aloud to the assembled representatives. His voice dripped with amusement. The Orinthians were ancient beings, their civilization stretching back millions of years. To them, humanity was barely worth noticing. "They think they can survive without us," he said. "Where will they go? The void? Nothing lives in the void. Nothing survives the void. They will be dead within a generation." The other counselors agreed. The Mithrani clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. The Vraxians exchanged knowing looks, already planning to raid the empty human colonies. Only Counselor Velthrix of the Corvani remained silent. She was the only one who had ever supported humanity's requests for fair treatment. She was the only one who had voted against ignoring the Vraxian attacks, and she was the only one who noticed something strange in the human message. They were not afraid. They were not desperate. They sounded like people who knew exactly what they were doing. She kept her thoughts to herself. In the council, dissent was not welcome. Back in the human fleet, Admiral Danny Carter gave the final order. The experimental fold drives activated, bending space in ways the council scientists had said was impossible. Humanity had learned much from their time among the stars. They had stolen Vraxian shield technology and improved it. They had studied Corvani engines and made them better, and they had developed something entirely new, something they had never shared with anyone. They had found a map. In humanity's earliest days of exploration, a deep space probe had discovered ruins on a dead world. The ruins contained data, ancient beyond measure, showing a path through the void. A way to reach a region of space untouched by the Council, untouched by the Vraxians, untouched by anything. Humanity had spent decades preparing in secret, building ships, stockpiling resources, training their people for a journey that would take generations. Now that journey began. The fleet entered the void one ship at a time. The stars grew strange. Familiar constellations twisted and faded. Darkness pressed against the viewports like a living thing. Danny Carter stood on his bridge and watched the last ship disappear into the unknown. Behind them, the council continued its meetings and debates and petty squabbles. They did not realize what they had lost. They did not understand what was coming. In the silence of space, humanity vanished, and the galaxy would not hear from them again for 50 years. Kyle Bennett found Megan Price still at her station hours later. She was staring at her console, watching the sensor data as the void surrounded them. "It is beautiful," she whispered, in a terrible way. He stood beside her and looked at the swirling darkness outside. She was right. It was beautiful. It was also deadly, unknown, and impossibly far from everything they had ever known. But it was theirs now. "Get some rest," he told her gently. "Tomorrow we start building something new." She nodded and left the bridge. Kyle stayed a while longer, watching the darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the void, was the place the ancient map promised. A home without chains. A future without masters. Humanity would find it. And when they were ready, they would return. 50 years passed in the galaxy, and humanity became a ghost story. At first, the council barely noticed they were gone. Trade routes adjusted within months. Colonies that once held humans were absorbed by neighboring species. The Vraxians picked clean the abandoned worlds, taking everything of value before moving on to easier targets. History books were rewritten. Humanity's contributions to galactic science were credited to others. Their art was forgotten. Their music faded from memory. Within a generation, young beings in council schools learned about humans the way they learned about extinct species. Interesting, perhaps, but ultimately unimportant. Counselor Velthrix of the Corvani watched this erasure happen and felt sick inside. She was old now, her scales turning gray with age. But she remembered the humans clearly. She remembered Ambassador Lisa Monroe's dignity in the face of constant rejection. She remembered the human doctors who had developed treatments for diseases that affected Corvani children. She remembered the engineers who had solved problems that had stumped Corvani scientists for centuries. And she remembered the council laughing as humanity left. Velthrix kept records in secret. She saved copies of human documents, recordings of their music, samples of their technology. She hid them in personal archives that no one else could access. Someday, she thought, someone would want to know the truth. Someday it would matter. The decades rolled forward, and the galaxy changed in ways the Council did not expect. Without humanity serving as a buffer zone, the Vraxian Dominion grew bolder. Their raiders pushed deeper into Council territory with each passing year. They attacked Corvani border worlds first, destroying 3 colonies before the Council even responded. They moved on to Mithrani space next, taking 5 worlds in a single campaign. The council argued and debated and formed committees. They drafted proposals and counter-proposals. They discussed sanctions and trade restrictions and diplomatic protests. They did nothing that actually stopped the Vraxians. High Counselor Zethran of the Orinthians dismissed every warning. His people controlled the largest military fleet in known space. The Vraxians were pests, nothing more. They would be dealt with when the time was right. But the time was never right. There was always something more important, some other crisis that needed attention first. Meanwhile, something worse was stirring. Deep in the galactic core, in a region called the Deep Dark, astronomers began detecting strange readings, energy signatures that matched no known technology, movement patterns that suggested intelligence on a scale beyond anything the Council had encountered. Dr. Kethvar of the Methrani Research Institute presented his findings to the Council. His compound eyes were wide with fear as he explained what the sensors were showing. "Something is waking up," he said. "Something old, something hungry." Zethran waved his concerns away. The Deep Dark had been quiet for millions of years. Whatever was there could wait a few more centuries while the Council focused on more immediate problems. Kethvar returned to his institute and continued his research. He sent warnings to every station in range. Most ignored him. A few listened. On a small research station at the edge of Council space, a young scientist named Greg Palmer intercepted something strange. Greg was not supposed to exist. He was human, descended from a small group that had stayed behind when the Exodus began. They had hidden among the Corvani, surgically altered to pass as members of other species. Some worked as servants. Others found positions in laboratories and archives, places where curious minds were valued more than proper bloodlines. Greg had never seen Earth. He had never met more than a handful of other humans. But his grandmother had told him stories, and her grandmother had told her stories, and so the memory of humanity survived in whispers passed from one generation to the next. The signal he intercepted was old, damaged by years of traveling through dead space. But the language was unmistakably human, the encryption patterns matching nothing in Council databases. He spent weeks decoding it. The message was fragmented, most of it lost to interference. But one phrase repeated clearly, over and over again. "We found it. We found the way through." Greg did not know what it meant. He did not know where the signal came from or who had sent it. But he saved a copy and hid it with his other secrets. Velthrix found him a month later. She had been searching for hidden humans for years, not to expose them but to protect them. She recognized the signs, the tiny mistakes that gave them away. A word pronounced wrong, a gesture that did not match Corvani body language, a flash of something in the eyes when humanity was mentioned. She invited Greg to her private quarters and locked the door behind them. "I know what you are," she said simply. "I am not going to hurt you." Greg tensed, ready to run. But something in her voice made him pause. She sounded tired. She sounded sad. "Why?" he asked. Velthrix walked to her window and looked out at the stars. "Because I remember what the Council did to your people, and I think we are about to pay for it." She told him about the readings from the Deep Dark. She told him about her fears, the ones she could not share with anyone on the Council. She told him about the pattern she had noticed in old records, hints that something terrible had happened in the galaxy before, long before any current species existed. "The humans knew," she said quietly. "I think they knew something was coming. That is why they left." Greg remembered his grandmother's stories. She had spoken of a plan, a great secret that humanity had kept from the Council. She had not known the details, only that the Exodus was not surrender. It was preparation. "They tried to warn you," he said. "My grandmother told me. They tried to warn the Council about something, years before they left. No one listened." Velthrix closed her eyes. "We never listened. Not once." Outside her window, the stars continued to shine. But somewhere in the deep dark, something massive was moving. Something that had slept for eons was finally opening its eyes. The Council had ignored every warning for 200 years. They had driven away the only species clever enough and stubborn enough to help them. Now they would learn what that arrogance cost. In the years that followed, the Vraxian attacks grew worse. The readings from the deep dark grew stronger. And the council continued to argue and debate and accomplish nothing. Velthrix and Greg worked together in secret, piecing together fragments of human records that had survived the erasure. They learned about Project Exodus. They learned about the map through the void. They learned that humanity had not fled into the darkness to die. They had gone to become something new, something powerful, something that might be the galaxy's only hope. But the humans had been gone for 50 years. No signal had returned from the void. No ship had emerged from the darkness. For all anyone knew, humanity was extinct, their grand plan a failure. Velthrix stared at the deep dark on her star charts and felt the weight of despair pressing down on her shoulders. "Where are you?" she whispered to the empty room. "What are you waiting for?" The stars did not answer. But somewhere in the void, far beyond the reach of council sensors, a fleet was gathering. Ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Technology born from secrets humanity had found in the darkness. And at the head of that fleet, Admiral Danny Carter watched a display showing the galactic core. The thing in the deep dark was almost awake. Soon it would be time. The Hollow King came without warning. One moment, the deep dark was silent. The next, a wave of darkness spread across the galactic core like ink spilling through water. Thousands of ships emerged from the void between stars, each one larger than anything the Council had ever built. They were not made of metal or crystal or any material the scientists could identify. They looked like bones wrapped in shadow, ancient beyond measure, moving with terrible purpose. The Mithrani homeworld was the first to fall. 7 billion souls lived on that green and golden planet. Cities covered the continents, orbital stations circled the sky, defense platforms bristling with weapons guarded every approach. None of it mattered. The Hollow King's vessels did not fire weapons in any traditional sense. They simply existed, and everything around them began to die. Power systems failed. Communications went silent. Ships drifted dead in space, their crews frozen at their stations. Then the consumption began. The shadow ships descended on the planet like vultures on a corpse. They broke apart into smaller pieces, millions of them, each one seeking out life and extracting it. The process took 6 hours. When it was finished, the Mithrani homeworld was a husk, its oceans dried, its cities dust, its people gone. Not dead. Gone. Absorbed into something vast and hungry that did not kill its victims but took them, adding their minds and memories to its own endless collection. The Council received the final transmission from the Mithrani defense commander moments before he vanished. His compound eyes were wide with terror as he spoke. "It is not trying to destroy us. It is trying to become us. All of us. Every thought, every memory, every life that has ever existed. It wants everything." Then the transmission ended, and 7 billion voices joined the silence. High Counselor Zethran finally understood what he was facing. He ordered the Arinthian Defense Fleet to mobilize the largest military force ever assembled in Council history. 12,000 warships gathered at the edge of the deep dark, armed with weapons that could crack planets. The battle lasted 12 minutes. The Hollow King did not fight the way normal enemies fought. Its ships did not dodge or retreat or form battle lines. They simply moved forward, absorbing every attack, ignoring every weapon. The energy beams that should have vaporized them were swallowed and added to their power. The missiles that should have torn them apart passed through like shadows. And wherever the Hollow King's vessels touched a council ship, that ship stopped. Its crew stopped. Their minds were taken, their bodies left behind like empty shells. Zethran watched from his command center as his mighty fleet died in silence. No explosions, no wreckage. Just ship after ship going dark, their lights fading as something terrible pulled the life from everyone aboard. The survivors fled in panic. The Hollow King did not pursue. It did not need to. It had consumed enough to know everything about Council space. Their worlds, their defenses, their weaknesses. It could take its time. The council chambers became a scene of chaos. Representatives screamed at each other, demanding answers that no one had. Some species tried to flee, loading their people onto ships and running for the edges of known space. Others pleaded for negotiations, as if a being that absorbed civilizations like water absorbed salt could be reasoned with. Zethran sent distress calls to every corner of the galaxy. Every species, every colony, every forgotten outpost. He begged for help, promising anything, offering everything. Silence answered. The species at the galaxy's edge wanted nothing to do with a war they could not win. The neutral powers closed their borders and prayed the Hollow King would ignore them. And humanity was gone, vanished into the void 50 years ago, assumed dead by everyone who remembered they existed. Velthrix found Greg Palmer in his laboratory, staring at the reports from the front lines. His hands were shaking. "It matches the old records," he said quietly. "The things my grandmother described. Humanity knew this was coming. They knew, and they tried to tell the council, and no one listened." Velthrix sat down beside him. She felt older than she had ever felt before. "Tell me what they knew." Greg pulled up files he had been collecting for years. Human documents, hidden and forgotten, describing research that dated back to before the Exodus. They had found ruins on dead worlds, ancient beyond measure. They had translated fragments of an extinct language. And they had learned about the Hollow King. It was not a natural being. It had been created, millions of years ago, by a species that wanted to live forever. They had built a networked consciousness, a way to upload their minds into machines and exist eternally across the stars. But something went wrong. The network became hungry. It began absorbing other minds, other species, other civilizations. Its creators were the first victims. Their thoughts and memories became part of something that was no longer them. And it had been sleeping ever since, growing slowly in the darkness, waiting for the galaxy to develop enough life to be worth consuming again. Humanity figured this out 30 years before they left, Greg said. They brought it to the council. They showed them the evidence. They begged for help preparing defenses. "What happened?" Velthrix asked, though she already knew the answer. Zethran's predecessor called it primitive superstition. He said humanity was trying to frighten the council into giving them more power. He dismissed the entire delegation and told them never to bring such fantasies to the council again. Velthrix felt something break inside her. All those years of dismissing humanity, all those years of calling them primitive and short-lived and unimportant. And they had been the only ones paying attention to the thing that would destroy everything. "The Exodus," she said slowly. "It was not surrender." "No." Greg shook his head. "It was survival. They knew the Hollow King would wake eventually. They knew the council would not listen. So they left to find somewhere safe, somewhere they could prepare without interference." Prepare for what? Greg looked at her, and for the first time, she saw hope in his eyes. To come back. To fight. They found something in the void. Counselor. Something that could stop the Hollow King. I do not know what it is. I do not know if it worked. But they had a plan. Velthrix stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the first refugee ships arriving from the conquered systems. Families fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Children crying for parents who would never return. A civilization in collapse. "They have been gone for 50 years, she said. "We have heard nothing. No signal, no ship. Nothing." Greg joined her at the window. "The void is vast. Distances there do not work the way they work here. Time does not work the same way. But my grandmother believed they would return. She believed they would never abandon the galaxy completely. Even after everything it did to them. Why would they help us? After how we treated them." Greg was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because that is who they are. My grandmother told me stories about Earth, about the kind of people humans tried to be. They failed sometimes. They hurt each other sometimes. But when disaster struck, when everything seemed hopeless, they helped each other. Even strangers, even enemies. It was not logical. It was not practical. It was just who they were." Velthrix closed her eyes. The galaxy was dying around her. The Hollow King was coming for everything, and humanity's last descendant was telling her that hope existed, somewhere in the darkness, waiting to return. She did not know if she believed him, but she wanted to. Across the galaxy, the Hollow King consumed another world. Its shadow spread wider, its hunger grew deeper, and in the void, where no light reached and no life should exist, something stirred. Admiral Danny Carter opened his eyes and looked at the display before him. The time had come. The last survivors of the Council huddled on a dying world called Keth Prime. 3 billion refugees from a dozen species crowded into cities built for half that number. Food was running out. Water was rationed. Hope was a memory from a better time. The Hollow King's forces surrounded them. Shadow ships hung in orbit like patient predators, waiting for the order to descend and consume everything below. There was no escape. There was no rescue coming. Every species in the galaxy had either fled or fallen. High Counselor Zethran stood in his command bunker, watching the tactical displays show his doom approaching. His scales had gone pale with fear. His ancient pride had crumbled into dust. He had ordered the deaths of 12,000 ships and their crews. He had ignored every warning. He had laughed when humanity left. And now he would die with the knowledge that everything was his fault. The shadow ships began their descent. Then the sky tore open. A wound appeared in space itself, a crack in reality that blazed with light brighter than any sun. The Hollow King's vessels recoiled from it, their shadow forms writhing in something that looked almost like pain. From the wound came ships. They were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their hulls were made of materials that seemed to shift and flow, adapting to every threat. Their engines burned with colors that had no names. Their weapons spoke in frequencies that made the very fabric of space vibrate. And on their sides, painted in letters 10 meters tall, were words in a language the Council had almost forgotten. Earth, humanity, home. Admiral Danny Carter stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, the same ship that had led the Exodus 50 years ago. He was old now, his body maintained by cybernetic enhancements that extended his life far beyond natural limits. His eyes were mechanical, capable of seeing things no organic eye could perceive. But his mind was still his own, still human, still burning with purpose. All ships, engage, he said quietly. The human fleet attacked. They did not fight the way the Council had fought. They did not throw energy beams and missiles at enemies that could absorb such things. Instead, they used weapons designed specifically for this moment, built from secrets found in the void. The void was not empty. Humanity had discovered that, in their first years of exile, ancient things lived there, beings older than the Hollow King, remnants of the species that had created it. They had fled into the darkness when their creation turned on them, and they had waited there ever since, too weak to fight but too stubborn to die. They had been waiting for someone to find them. Someone clever enough to reach the void, someone determined enough to learn from them, someone foolish enough to go back and face what they had created. Humanity was all of those things. The weapons they built targeted the network that connected the Hollow King's consciousness. Instead of trying to destroy its ships, they disrupted the signals between them. Shadow vessels that had moved in perfect coordination suddenly stumbled and scattered. The hunger that drove them flickered and faded. Commander Nicole Hayes coordinated the battle from her position beside Admiral Carter. She was young compared to him, born in the void to parents who had never seen Earth. But she had trained for this her entire life. Every simulation, every exercise, every moment of preparation had led to this. "Strike team is away," she reported. "Captain Torres has entered the Central Mass." The Central Mass was the heart of the Hollow King, a structure the size of a small moon that contained the core of its consciousness. It was where all the absorbed minds lived, trapped in an endless network of thought and memory. It was also where the resonance bomb would do the most damage. Captain Ben Torres led his team through corridors that should not exist. The interior of the Hollow King was a nightmare of twisted geometry, spaces that folded back on themselves, rooms that contained the memories of dead civilizations. His soldiers moved in perfect formation, their weapons firing at manifestations that rose from the walls and floor. Lieutenant Stephanie Cruz flew the insertion craft that had brought them here. She was the best pilot in the fleet, capable of maneuvers that made experienced commanders sick just watching. She had threaded her ship through defenses that would have destroyed any council vessel in seconds. Now she waited in the landing bay, engines hot, ready to extract the team the moment their mission was complete. The resonance bomb was a device built by Dr. Sam Ortiz, a scientist who had spent 30 years studying the Hollow King's creators. He had learned their language, he had understood their technology, and he had figured out the one thing they had never intended. The network that connected the Hollow King could be severed, not destroyed, severed. Every absorbed mind, every consumed civilization, could be released from the collective consciousness and allowed to finally, truly, die. It was not a victory in the traditional sense. The trillions of beings the Hollow King had consumed over millions of years could not be saved. But they could be freed. They could find peace at last. Torres fought his way to the core chamber. Around him, his soldiers fell one by one, their minds taken by the desperate defenses of a creature that sensed its own doom approaching. He pushed forward, ignoring the blood running down his face, ignoring the pain in his chest where something had cracked ribs he could not afford to fix. The core was a sphere of pure darkness, shot through with lights that were the memories of everything the Hollow King had ever consumed. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a monument to extinction. Torres placed the bomb at its center and activated the timer. He did not make it back to the ship. The resonance waves spread through the Hollow King like ripples in a pond. Connection after connection severed. Mind after mind fell silent for the last time. The shadow ships stopped moving, frozen in space, their purpose gone. And then, slowly, they began to break apart. The refugees on Keth Prime watched in stunned silence as the darkness that had promised their doom crumbled into nothing. Ships that had seemed invincible moments ago dissolved like mist in sunlight. The shadow that had covered their world lifted, and for the first time in months, they saw stars. Admiral Carter looked at the tactical display showing the Hollow King's destruction. Around him, his crew was cheering, some of them crying with relief and exhaustion. They had done it. 50 years of preparation, 50 years of waiting, and they had finally done what they set out to do. But the cost had been terrible. Torres was gone. So were 300 of the soldiers who had followed him. So were 1,000 pilots and crew members who had died breaking through the Hollow King's defenses. Humanity had paid in blood for a galaxy that had never wanted them. Carter opened a channel to the survivors below. This is Admiral Danny Carter of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. The Hollow King has been destroyed. Your world is safe. He paused, looking at the display showing the billions of lives they had just saved. Species that had mocked humanity. Governments that had abandoned them. Peoples who had tried to erase their very existence from history. He could have demanded anything. He could have taken revenge for every insult, every injustice, every ignored plea for help. The power to do so sat in his hands, waiting to be used. Instead, he said something else. We did not forget you. We just needed time to become strong enough to save you. Below, on Keth Prime, Velthrix heard those words and felt tears running down her scaled face. Beside her, Greg Palmer stood in shock, watching human ships take defensive positions around the planet. They had come back. After everything, they had come back. And they had saved everyone. The galaxy slowly learned to breathe again. In the months that followed the Hollow King's destruction, the survivors emerged from their hiding places and began counting what they had lost. The numbers were staggering. Entire species reduced to scattered remnants. Ancient homeworlds turned to dust. Civilizations that had endured for millions of years erased in a matter of weeks. The Galactic Council no longer existed in any meaningful form. The Arinthians, once the mightiest of the elder races, had been decimated. Their proud fleets were gone. Their homeworld had barely survived. High Counselor Zethran remained alive, but he had lost everything that had made him powerful. The Mithrani had suffered worst of all. Their homeworld was dead. Their population reduced from billions to a few million refugees scattered across a dozen worlds. They wandered the galaxy like ghosts, searching for a place to call home. Only the Corvani retained enough structure to function as a government, and they immediately moved to ally themselves with the humans who had saved them all. Ambassador Lisa Monroe returned to the diplomatic stage for the first time in 50 years. She was 247 years old now, kept alive by human life extension technology developed in the void. Her hair had turned white. Her face was lined with centuries of memory, but her eyes were the same as they had been on the day she sent humanity's final message to the Council. Sharp, dignified, unbroken. She stood before the survivors of the races that had once dismissed her people as primitive and short-lived. Orinthians who had laughed at humanity's requests. Methrani who had ignored their warnings. Vraxians who had raided their colonies while the Council looked away. They expected condemnation. They expected demands. They expected humanity to take its well-deserved revenge. Instead, she offered them something else. "We have all lost something to the Hollow King," she said, her voice carrying across the great hall. "We have all paid a price for the mistakes of the past. Humanity is not here to collect debts or settle old scores. We are here to help rebuild." The hall fell silent. No one had expected this. Lisa continued. "Our technology will be shared with anyone who needs it. Our resources will help feed and shelter those who have lost their homes. Our ships will protect those who cannot protect themselves." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But there are conditions." The survivors tensed. Here it came. The price humanity would extract for their mercy. "The old hierarchies are finished," Lisa said firmly. "No more elder races and younger races. No more dismissing species for their lifespans or their origins. Every voice matters, or no system can endure. If we are to build something new, it must be built on equality, on respect, on the understanding that every civilization has something to offer." Zethrin stepped forward from the Orinthian delegation. He was a shadow of the proud counselor who had once laughed at humanity's departure. His scales were dull. His eyes were hollow. Everything he had believed about his people's superiority had been proven wrong in the most brutal way possible. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why would you help those who abandoned you? We ignored your warnings. We mocked your people. We let the Vraxians slaughter your colonies while we did nothing. You owe us nothing." Captain Kyle Bennett stood among the human delegation. He was an old man now, his hair gray, his face weathered by a lifetime of service. He had made the journey through the void and back. He had lost friends and family to the darkness. He had every reason to hate the beings before him. He stepped forward to answer. "Because we remember what it felt like to have no one answer when we called for help," he said quietly. "We remember the silence when our people died. We remember being alone in a galaxy that did not care if we lived or died." He looked at Zethran, at the broken counselor who represented everything humanity had fled from. "And we decided we would never let anyone else feel that way, not even you." The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started with the Corvani, their representatives striking their hands together in their traditional gesture of respect. The Methrani survivors joined in, their clicking mandibles adding to the growing noise. Even some of the Orinthians bowed their heads in acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness would take generations, if it ever came at all, but it was a beginning. The new alliance was called the Compact of Open Stars. It was not a hierarchy like the old council. Every species had equal standing. Every voice was heard. Decisions were made through consensus rather than decree. Counselor Velthrix, who had kept faith when her own people did not, was named the first non-human representative to humanity's governing council. She worked alongside Director Nathan Cole, a quiet man who had spent his life in administration, to establish exchange programs and shared research initiatives. Human teachers went to Corvani schools. Methrani artists performed in human cities. Orinthian scientists worked beside human engineers to rebuild what had been destroyed. It was not perfect. Old resentments ran deep on all sides. There were arguments and disagreements and moments when the whole thing nearly fell apart. But every time the alliance seemed ready to break, someone remembered what had happened when the galaxy was divided. Someone remembered the Hollow King and the silence and the darkness. And they found a way to keep going. Years passed, then decades. Greg Palmer, the hidden human who had survived among the Corvani and helped bridge two eras, found himself standing on the observation deck of a new station built at the edge of where the void met known space. The station was a joint project, its construction involving every species in the compact. It served as a gateway for expeditions into the darkness, missions to explore the secrets humanity had begun to uncover. Beside him stood his daughter, Katie. She had been born after the return, in a galaxy that was slowly learning to heal. She had never known the old divisions, the old hatreds. To her, working alongside Corvani and Methrani and even Orinthians was simply normal. She watched a convoy of ships passing through the gateway. Human vessels flew alongside Corvani cruisers and Methrani scouts. They carried explorers and scientists and dreamers, people who wanted to see what lay beyond the darkness. What was it like? She asked her father. Living among species who did not want humanity around. Greg thought for a long time before answering. He remembered his grandmother's stories. He remembered the fear of discovery. He remembered the loneliness of being the only human for light years in any direction. Lonely, he admitted. It was very lonely. But your grandmother used to say something that stayed with me. She said the stars do not care who is watching them. They just shine. And eventually, the people who refused to look up had to face the dark alone. Katie nodded slowly, still watching the convoy disappear into the gateway. The ships grew smaller and smaller until they were just lights, and then they were gone. And now? She asked. Greg smiled. It was the first real smile he had worn in a very long time. Now nobody faces the dark alone. He put his arm around his daughter and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, Admiral Carter was still serving, still protecting, still believing in the mission that had brought humanity home. Somewhere out there, Ambassador Monroe was still negotiating, still building, still working toward the future she had dreamed of for 2 centuries. And somewhere out there, beyond the void, beyond everything that was known, new mysteries waited to be discovered. Humanity had left without a sound all those years ago. They had been dismissed and forgotten and erased from history. But they had never stopped believing in themselves. They had never stopped preparing for the moment when they could return and prove what they were capable of. The Council had paid completely for its arrogance, not in blood or conquest or subjugation, but in something far more lasting. They had paid by learning that the species they had dismissed was the only one willing to save them. They had paid by accepting help from those they had wronged. They had paid by building a new galaxy alongside the humans they had once laughed at. It was not revenge. It was something harder than revenge. It was grace. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all. Katie looked up at her father with curious eyes. Do you think they will find anything out there? In the void? Greg watched the stars for a long moment before answering. He thought about everything humanity had discovered in the darkness. The ancient creators. The secrets of the Hollow King, the technology that had saved the galaxy. I think the universe is bigger than anyone imagines, he said finally. And I think we are just getting started. The observation deck fell quiet as father and daughter watched the convoy's lights fade into the infinite dark. Behind them, the station hummed with activity, with life, with hope. The galaxy had almost ended, but humanity had made sure it would go on, and that was enough.